I found out my husband had been cheating on me at his sister's wedding, not from a text message, not from a confession, from a seating chart. My mother-in-law had placed a woman named Diane at the family table, right between my husband's aunt and his younger brother, while I was seated 2 tables away with people I had never met. I thought it was a mistake. I asked about it quietly before the reception started. My mother-in-law looked at me with a calm, steady expression and said the seating had been planned for weeks, and there was no room to change it now. That was when I understood this was not a mistake. I smiled. I sat down at my assigned table, and I started paying attention in a way I never had before. What I found over the next 3 months did not just end my marriage. It ended the lie that the whole family had been living inside of, and it cost every single one of them something real. Before I go any further, I need to ask you something. If you looked at a seating chart and understood in one moment that your husband's family had chosen his mistress over you, what would you have done right there at that wedding? Would you have walked out? Would you have caused a scene? Would you have confronted your husband in front of everyone? Or would you have done what Camila did and smiled, sat down, and started building the case that would change everything? Tell me in the comments. Because what you would do in that moment says everything. Stay with me. This story goes to places that are going to make you feel a lot of things. My name is Camila. I am 39 years old. I am originally from a small city in the south of the country, and I moved to the north when I was 24 for work, and that is where I met my husband, Daniel. I want to tell you who I was before all of this happened because I think it matters. I was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday. I was the kind of woman who showed up early to help set up and stayed late to help clean up. I was the kind of woman who ironed her husband's shirts when he had an important meeting even though he had never once asked me to. I gave a lot. I gave quietly and without keeping score because I believed that was what love looked like. I believed that for 11 years. Then I sat down at a wedding reception at a table full of strangers, while my husband's family sat 20 feet away with a woman I did not yet know the name of, and everything I had believed started to come apart. Let me tell you about Daniel first, because you need to understand him to understand why this took me so long to see. Daniel is the kind of man who is enormously charming in a room full of people and somewhat absent when it is just the two of you. He is funny and warm in public and slightly distracted in private, and I had spent 11 years interpreting that distraction as the natural result of a busy career rather than as evidence of a man whose attention was consistently somewhere else. He worked in commercial architecture. He traveled regularly for projects. He had a large social circle that overlapped only partially with mine. I had built my own life around him without fully realizing how much of my own space I had quietly given up in the process. His mother, Elaine, is the kind of woman who runs a family the way a general runs a campaign. She has strong opinions about everything, and she expresses them with a sweetness that makes disagreement feel like ingratitude. She was never openly unkind to me. She was the other kind of unkind, the kind that smiles while making you feel slightly less than, slightly outside, slightly tolerated rather than genuinely welcomed. I had been in that family for 11 years, and I still sometimes felt like a guest who had overstayed a visit. I told myself it was just her personality. I told myself some mothers-in-law were like that. I told myself a lot of things. Daniel's sister, Priya, was getting married on a Saturday in June. The wedding was at a vineyard about 2 hours outside the city. It was beautiful in the way that expensive outdoor weddings are beautiful: white linens, string lights, the smell of warm grass, and something floral. I had helped Priya choose her flowers. I had driven her to 2 dress fittings. I had spent 3 weekends helping address invitation envelopes because Priya wanted them handwritten, and her handwriting was, by her own admission, catastrophic. I had done all of this because I loved Priya, or I thought I did, and because being useful to this family had always been my way of earning a place in it. We arrived at the vineyard on the Friday evening for the rehearsal dinner. I noticed then, for the first time, a woman I did not recognize sitting very comfortably at the table where Elaine and her close friends were gathered. She was about my age, dark-haired, well-dressed, laughing easily at something one of Elaine's friends had said. I asked Daniel who she was. He said she was a colleague of Priya's. He said without looking up from his phone. I accepted that. I moved on. I should not have moved on. The wedding ceremony the next day was lovely. Priya was radiant. Her new husband, a quiet, kind man named Thomas, cried when he saw her coming down the aisle, and that made several people around me cry too. I felt genuinely happy for them in that moment. I held Daniel's hand during the vows. He held mine back. I thought, we are fine. I thought, this is what our marriage looks like. I was wrong on both counts, but I did not know that yet. The reception was where the seating chart became impossible to ignore. I found our names on the board near the entrance and immediately saw that Daniel was listed at table 1, the family table, and I was listed at table 7. I stood in front of that board for a moment thinking I had misread it. I went back and read it again. Daniel, table 1. Camila, table 7. I looked at table 1. Daniel was already there, settling in, talking to his uncle. The dark-haired woman from the rehearsal dinner was seated 2 chairs from him. She was talking to Elaine like they had known each other for years. Because, I would later learn, they had. I found Elaine near the bar. I said, as calmly as I could, that I thought there might be a mistake in the seating. She looked at me with that particular expression she had, warm on the surface and entirely unmovable underneath. And she said the seating had been arranged carefully, and there was no room to adjust at this point. She said I would enjoy table 7. There were very nice people there. She said it the way you say something to a child who is asking a question you have already decided not to answer honestly. Then she turned back to the conversation she had been having. I went to table 7. I sat down. I smiled at the people around me. I introduced myself. I ate the appetizer that was placed in front of me. And inside my chest, there was something happening that was not quite anger yet, and not quite grief yet. It was more like the specific feeling of a piece of the world shifting slightly, and the realization that it had been shifting for a long time, and you had simply been too close to notice the angle. I watched table 1 from my seat at table 7 all evening. I watched Daniel laugh and drink, and be completely at ease in a way that I had not seen from him in months. I watched the dark-haired woman lean toward him twice during dinner in the easy, familiar way of someone who is not trying to be subtle because the people around her have already approved. I watched Elaine include her in every toast, every fode, every moment that was supposed to be family. I watched my husband's family, in real time, show me exactly where I ranked. I did not make a scene. I danced when the dancing started. I hugged Priya and told her she was beautiful and meant it. I got in the car with Daniel at the end of the night and I did not say a single word about any of it. He asked if I had a good time. I said it was a beautiful wedding. He said yes, it was. We drove home in the particular silence of two people who are not saying the things that most need to be said. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, I lay in the dark and I made a decision. The decision was not to confront him. The decision was not to call Elaine. The decision was not to do anything visible or emotional or reactive. The decision was to find out exactly what was true before I did anything at all. Because what I had seen at that wedding was a feeling, not yet a fact. And I had spent too long acting on feelings that turned out to be incomplete pictures. I was not going to do that again. This time I was going to have the complete picture before I moved a single step. I want to tell you something about the weeks that followed because people sometimes assume that when a woman in my situation starts gathering information, she must be cold or calculating, or that she has already stopped loving the person she is investigating. That was not true for me. I was still in love with Daniel while I was doing this. I was doing this because I was still in love with him, because the possibility that what I had seen at that wedding meant what I thought it meant was still, at that point, unbearable, and I needed to know for certain before I let myself feel the full weight of it. Gathering information was not coldness. It was the last act of a woman who was still hoping to be wrong. I started with what I already had. Daniel's phone was not something I could access directly. He used a passcode I did not know, which itself was new, because for the first 7 years of our marriage, neither of us had passcodes on our phones because we had never needed them. The passcode had appeared about 2 years ago. I had noticed it and had made a mental note that landed in the same pile of mental notes I had been making and not acting on for longer than I wanted to admit. What I did have access to was our shared email account, which we had set up years ago for joint finances and household subscriptions. And in that account, in a folder neither of us had touched in months, I found something that had been forwarded there automatically from a hotel booking service. A confirmation for a weekend stay at a boutique hotel about 90 minutes from our city. The booking was in Daniel's name. The dates were a long weekend in March, 4 months earlier. Daniel had told me he was at a conference in another city that weekend. I had made him a travel playlist for the drive. I sat with the hotel confirmation for a long time, then I printed it. I put it in a folder that I kept in my car, in the pocket behind the passenger seat, which Daniel never used. That folder became the beginning of something. Over the next 3 weeks I found more. I went back through the shared email carefully and found 2 more hotel confirmations from the previous 18 months, both during weekends when Daniel had supposedly been elsewhere for work. I found a florist invoice in his personal email. I had his email password from years ago when he had asked me to check something for him and had never changed it, for flowers delivered to an address that was not ours. I searched the address. It was an apartment building in a neighborhood about 20 minutes away. The dark-haired woman's name I found out through a combination of the florist invoice address and some careful social media searching was Diane. Diane worked in interior design. She had a public Instagram that told me, once I looked at it with new eyes, a great deal. There were photos of restaurants I recognized, places Daniel had told me he had been to with clients. There were photos of a weekend in a coastal town that matched exactly a weekend Daniel had told me he was visiting a project site. There was, in one photo from about 8 months ago, a reflection in a restaurant window that showed a man at the same table, his back to the camera, in a jacket I had bought Daniel for his birthday 2 years earlier. I did not cry when I found that photo. I had moved past the part where I cried. I was in the part where I documented. I printed everything. Every hotel confirmation, every florist receipt, every screenshot from Diane's Instagram with the dates annotated. I organized it in the folder in my car by date, going back as far as I could trace, and what the folder showed me when it was organized was that this had been happening for at least 2 years. Possibly longer. 2 years of parallel weekends. 2 years of cover stories. 2 years of a family, because I was now certain Elaine knew, and I suspected Priya knew, that had protected his secret while I drove to dress fittings and addressed envelopes, and sat at table 7 with strangers at a wedding where the other woman had a seat at the family table. The moment I understood Elaine had known was the moment the nature of what I was dealing with changed completely. This was not just a husband who had strayed. This was a family that had made a collective decision to protect him at my expense. They had looked at me, at 11 years of my time and my labor and my love, and they had decided that Diane belonged at that table more than I did. That thought settled into me like concrete setting. It did not make me scream. It made me very, very quiet and very, very sure. I called a lawyer named Rosa on a Tuesday morning. I had found her through a friend who had been through a divorce 3 years earlier and described Rosa as the kind of woman who does not waste a single word or a single hour. Rosa was exactly that. I sat in her office and I put my folder on her desk and I walked her through everything I had gathered. She read through it carefully. She asked precise questions. At the end, she looked at me and said, "You have done very good work here." Then she told me what the next steps looked like. Rosa explained that in terms of the divorce itself, the documentation I had was useful, but not the primary driver of what I would receive in a settlement. What mattered more, she said, was the financial picture. She asked me how much I knew about the state of our joint finances. I told her what I thought I knew. She suggested I find out more before we filed anything. She said, "People who maintain affairs for extended periods often develop financial habits that are worth examining carefully." She did not say more than that. She did not need to. I went home and I spent the next 4 evenings going through every financial record I could access. Joint bank statements going back 3 years, credit card statements, the mortgage documents, Daniel's business account, which I had limited visibility into but enough to see the overall picture. And Rosa had been right to prompt me. Because what I found in those statements, once I was looking with the right kind of attention, was a pattern that I should have noticed much earlier and had simply not been looking for. over a period of approximate 26 months, Daniel had made a series of cash withdrawals and transfers that individually looked like normal business expenses or personal spending, but when mapped against each other, told a different story. Dinners at restaurants we had never been to together. Hotel stays that matched dates in my folder. A recurring transfer to an account I did not recognize that had started 27 months ago, right around the time the passcode appeared on his phone, and totaled, over that period, just over $31,000. $31,000. Moved quietly, in amounts small enough not to trigger automatic alerts, over more than 2 years, from money that belonged to both of us, into an account I had never known existed. I printed every relevant statement. I added them to the folder. Then I called Rosa and told her what I had found. She said, "Come in tomorrow morning. Bring everything." I want to pause here and tell you something about what it feels like to be doing this kind of work while still living inside a normal life. Every morning I made coffee. Every evening I made dinner or Daniel made dinner or we ordered something and ate it in front of the television like two people who had simply run out of things to say. He was not cruel to me during this period. He was just absent in the particular way he had always been absent, distracted, slightly elsewhere, pleasant enough on the surface. He had no idea what was in the folder in my car. He had no idea about Rosa. He had no idea that the woman who was ironing his shirts and making grocery lists and asking how his day was had spent the previous 3 weeks building a case that was going to change every calculation he had made. Rosa moved quickly once she had the full financial picture. She connected me with a forensic accountant named Bernard who specialized in marital asset cases. Bernard spent 2 weeks going through everything I had given Rosa, and then produced a report that was 41 pages long and outlined, in precise professional language, every irregular transfer, every unexplained withdrawal, every financial decision that had reduced our joint assets without my knowledge or consent. The $31,000 was the most obvious part. Bernard found more. When the full picture was assembled, the total amount that had been moved or spent in ways that were inconsistent with our household finances over approximately 2.5 years was closer to $58,000. $58,000. That was what 11 years of trust had cost me, in purely financial terms, not counting the years themselves. Rosa filed for divorce on a Thursday morning in September, 3 months after the wedding. I was at work when she filed. I had told no one, not my friends, not my sister, not a single person in Daniel's family. I had kept everything inside the folder and inside Rosa's office and inside my own chest for 3 months. I had kept it that way deliberately because I knew that the moment Daniel found out what I had, his family would know too, and Elaine would start making calls and stories would be shaped, and the version of events that got told first tends to be the one that people remember even when it is later contradicted. I wanted to be the one who told the truth first. Not publicly. Not dramatically. Just first, in the right room with the right documents. Daniel came home that Thursday evening to find me sitting at the kitchen table with Rosa's contact information written on a note card and a copy of the filing on the table in front of me. He walked into the kitchen and stopped when he saw my face. I think he had always known, somewhere, that a version of this moment was coming. I think people who do what he did always carry a low-level awareness of the shape of the consequences. He just had not expected it to look like this, me, calm, at the kitchen table, with paperwork already filed and a lawyer already engaged and 3 months of documentation already assembled. I said, I have filed for divorce. I have a lawyer. The filing includes a forensic accounting report. I want you to read it before you call your family or your own attorney, because the report covers the last 2.5 years in detail. I slid the summary page across the table. He sat down slowly. He read it. I watched the color change in his face as he moved from the first page to the second. He tried several things. He said it was not what it looked like. He said Diane was not important. He said the money transfers had been for things he could explain. He said he had been planning to tell me. He said he was sorry. He said the words sorry and explain, and it was complicated in various combinations for several minutes, and I let him say all of them, and I did not respond to any of them because there was nothing to respond to. The documents on the table had already responded. I did not need to. Then he said something that I had been waiting for him to say, because I knew this particular man well enough to know it was coming. He said, my mother is going to be very upset about this. And something in me, something that had been very tightly wounded for 3 months, went still and clean and clear. I said, I know she will be. I said, I want you to show her the forensic report when you call her. I want her to see the full picture. He looked at me for a moment. He said, Camila. I said, show her the report, Daniel. Then I stood up, and I went into the bedroom, and I closed the door. Let me tell you what happened in the days that followed, because this is where the story becomes about more than just the marriage. Elaine called me the next morning. She called in the tone I had always braced for, the smooth, controlled tone of a woman who has managed difficult situations before and considers herself skilled at it. She said she was very sorry to hear about the trouble Daniel and I were having. She said these things were always complicated. She said she hoped Camila and Daniel could find a way to work through this privately for the sake of the family. She said the word family 3 times in the first 2 minutes of the call. I said, Elaine, I want to make sure you have seen the forensic accounting report. She paused. She said she had heard Daniel's version of it. I said, I would like you to read the actual document. I can have Rosa send it to you directly if that would help. There was a silence on the line. Then she said, in a slightly different tone, that she did not think that would be necessary. I said, I think it would be. I think it would help you understand exactly what the legal proceedings are going to involve. Rosa sent Elaine the full report that afternoon. Elaine did not call me back. Priya called me 2 days later. Priya I had genuinely loved, or I had genuinely loved the person I thought Priya was, and so this call was harder. She started by saying she had not known. I want you to understand that I do not know whether to believe that. I think Priya probably knew enough, knew that Diane was not simply a colleague, knew that Elaine had formed a relationship with Diane that went beyond casual acquaintance, but had chosen the comfortable position of not knowing the full details so she could tell herself she had not actively participated. That is a kind of knowing. It is just the kind that allows a person to keep their hands clean while still benefiting from someone else's dishonesty. I let Priya say what she needed to say. When she finished, I said, "Priya, I drove you to 2 dress fittings. I addressed your wedding invitations by hand. I sat at table 7 at your wedding while the woman your brother had been seeing for 2 years sat at the family table." I said all of that very quietly. Priya did not have an answer. She said she was sorry. I said I heard her. Then I said I needed some time and I ended the call. The divorce proceedings took 7 months. Rosa was thorough and Bernard's report was airtight, and the financial misconduct that the report documented gave us significant leverage in the negotiation. Daniel's attorney pushed back on several points, but the documentation did not bend. And people who have been doing something wrong and then find themselves in a room where every piece of what they did is itemized and dated tend to lose their appetite for aggressive legal combat fairly quickly. The settlement included my full share of our joint assets, an equitable adjustment for the $58,000 that had been diverted, and the house. The house had been my primary concern, not for financial reasons, though it was our largest asset, but because I had spent 11 years building a home inside it. I had painted every room. I had planted the garden in the backyard. I had made it into a place that felt like mine in a way that nothing else in the marriage had fully felt like mine, and I was not going to let it be traded away in a settlement. I kept the house. I want to tell you about the moment the settlement was finalized because it was quieter than you might expect. Rosa called me on a Wednesday afternoon and told me the papers had been signed and everything was complete. I was sitting in my car in a parking lot outside a grocery store when she called. I thanked her. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes after I hung up. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the way you feel when something very heavy that you have been carrying for a long time is finally set down. Not light exactly, just different. Relieved in a way that is almost painful because of how long the weight had been there. I went inside and bought groceries. I came home. I made dinner. I ate it at my own kitchen table in my own house in the quiet that was no longer the quiet of someone absent and distracted, but the quiet of a space that was fully, completely mine. I heard about what happened with Daniel and Diane through mutual connections over the following months. In the way that you hear things in a city when you have been part of a social world for a long time. They moved in together. Then they did not. There was some kind of falling out that involved, from what I understood, Diane discovering certain financial patterns that she found concerning. I did not pursue the details. I did not need them. I noted them the way you note the weather, with mild interest and no particular investment in the outcome. Elaine I did not hear from again after the forensic report was sent. Priya sent me a message on my birthday, 8 months after the divorce was finalized, that said she had been thinking about me and hoped I was well. I read the message. I did not respond for 3 days. Then I sent back 3 words. Thank you, Priya. That was all. Some bridges do not need to be burned. They just need to be allowed to become very long and very quiet. What I want to tell you now is the thing that I think this story is actually about. Because it is not about the affair, not really. Affairs are painful and common, and the mechanics of them follow patterns that are depressingly predictable. What this story is about, What I think about when I think about those 8 months is the seeding chart, because that seeding chart was a statement. It was Elaine saying, in the clearest possible way, without using a single word, "This family has made its choice and you are not it." It was Priya going along with it because going along was easier than refusing. It was Daniel sitting at table 1 and not getting up, not saying anything, not choosing me in the most public and visible way that a person can fail to choose someone. It was an entire family communicating, through the choreography of a wedding reception, that the 11 years I had given them were not enough to earn me a seat at their table, literally. What I want you to understand is that the moment I understood what that seating chart meant was also the moment I stopped needing their table. I had been trying to earn a seat in that family for 11 years. I had been useful and present and accommodating and warm, and I had believed, the way good faith people believe things, that this was the way to build belonging. It was not. You cannot earn belonging from people who have already decided you do not belong. You can only give and give until you finally see clearly that the giving is not building anything, and then you can stop. I stopped. The garden in my backyard is the best it has ever looked. I planted new roses along the back fence last spring, and they came in beautifully. I have a friend named Sylvia who comes over on Sunday mornings, and we drink coffee on the back step and talk about everything and nothing, and that simple, uncomplicated warmth is more nourishing than 11 years of trying to be enough for people who had already decided I was not. I am 39 years old. I have a house that is mine. I have a lawyer who I now consider a person I genuinely respect. I have a garden. I have Sunday mornings. I have the specific, hard-won clarity of a woman who spent a long time being too patient with the wrong people, and then, at a vineyard on a Saturday in June, looked at a seeding chart and finally understood the full shape of what she had been given. I understood it. I documented it. I acted on it. Quietly, completely, without a single scene. If this story reached something in you, I want to know what hit the hardest. Was it the seeding chart? Was it the $58,000? Was it the moment Camila slid the forensic report across the kitchen table and said nothing? Or was it the last thing, the part about trying to earn a seat at a table that was never going to be yours? Tell me in the comments. And if you know a woman right now who is giving everything to a family that keeps putting her at table 7, send her this. Not as advice, just as a reminder that clarity, when it finally comes, is a gift. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. The next one is already written. It is just as real, just as quiet, and just as satisfying.